and forth and back and forth. And remember, they've gone back and forth since January on this, is the question of whether Bob Mueller will subpoena the president should his lawyers say, you know, we're not going to let him testify, for example, on obstruction. And I think there are lots of sources that we've been talking to who are familiar with what's going on who say, look, we don't believe that Mueller will subpoena the president because he doesn't want to drag this out. He doesn't want to take it to the Supreme Court. So we believe perhaps we'll be able to come to some arrangement. But as Laura says, there is absolutely no guarantee that Mueller is operating on any timeline, including the timeline of the midterm elections. So we just don't know.
You know, it's interesting. Giuliani gave an interview to Jay Sekulow, who's another one of the president's personal lawyers, Ron Braunstein, and suggested this whole thing about an interview should be wrapped up by September 1st. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, boy, I mean, you could certainly run a clip of all the times that Rudy Giuliani and other members of the team have said that either the interview or the entire investigation is going to be wrapped up. So, you know, I don't think, as Gloria said, I don't think we know on that. And as Laura knows better than I mean, there is Justice Department guidance, both in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration, that explicitly warns prosecutors against making decisions that could be seen as influencing an election, something that James Comey, you know, apparently didn't read too closely. But I've got to think that we are heading into the point where the idea of wrapping this up one way or another is kind of impinging on that by getting too close to the midterm election. And just one last thought, whatever the legal rationale, the idea that a sitting president would refuse to answer questions from a special counsel about something as significant as potential foreign interference in an American election, you really do have to wonder how that would play out among voters outside of the president's base and how it would be received by those Republicans in the swing districts who are feeling even more endangered after the party's close call in Ohio yesterday.
Because the argument being, if you got nothing to hide, what's the big deal about sitting down and just simply telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Sabrina Siddiqui, how do you see it?
Well, I think that if you look at the ways in which the president and his allies have repeatedly attacked the special counsel in the investigation, it's clear that their efforts are a lot more focused at this point on persuading public opinion. And certainly it bears repeating that there's no evidence to support the president's claims that there's some sort of widespread bias against him. But certainly polling has shown that he's been able to keep the Republican base intact. Now, as Ron is pointing out, that does not necessarily extend to the general electorate. And I think it's also very striking that the president's legal team, we clearly do not want him to sit down with the special counsel. You've heard Rudy Giuliani constantly talk about perjury traps when it comes to questions around obstruction of justice. So it's also very telling that the real issue here is that the president's legal team does not trust their client to tell the truth. At
what point does Mueller simply issue a subpoena, and how threatening, how much of a problem or would that be for the president?
The second that Mueller realizes that any negotiations are now done in bad faith and are simply a delay tactic and not part of a good faith negotiation process, he is entitled to try to secure a subpoena and get it compelled. And likely he would win at the Supreme Court level. It's just that it would be a longer drawn out battle. And the point of the issue of September and why the DOJ guidelines are important here, I know the midterm elections are in November, but because there's early voting in certain states that begin in September, that's why that September date is so important. But it's arguable whether or not the president, who is not on the ballot, would have a valid basis to say that a Mueller probe investigating members of his own campaign, none of whom are on a ballot, would actually be undermined in this election cycle. So there is an argument to be made that Mueller's probe can continue even through September, October, and November.
Speaking of election cycle, Gloria, what do you make of last night the results in two important races in Ohio, the 12th congressional district? The Republican right now slightly ahead by about 1,700 votes, Troy Balderson over Danny O'Connor, the Democrat, but there's still about 8,000 votes that have to be counted, absentee ballots. And in Kansas, the Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, he's slightly ahead by 191 votes over Jeff Collier. President Trump endorsed Chris Kobach. What are your big takeaways from last night?
Well, first of all, Ohio shouldn't have even been a race. You know, this was a place that Donald Trump won by 11 points. This has been a reliably Republican district for more than 3 decades. And I think that the fact that the Democrat has come that close means that if I'm a Republican and I'm running in a suburban district, I'm worried. I'm scared because this race shouldn't have even been there. So I think that, you know, if you're a Republican now, you have to decide how close you cozy up to the president, whether he helps you or whether he hurts you. And the big issue here, as it always is in midterm elections, is motivation. And if you looked at the numbers in the state of Ohio, as we did last night, Democrats said 66% of Democrats in this special election in the middle of August said that they were motivated to go out and vote. So I think you have to kind of multiply that when you get to a real election, a general election. And if I'm a Republican, I'm nervous about losing the House.
How do you see it, Ron?
Well, I basically agree. I mean, I think this election told us a lot because it confirmed the most important patterns we've been seeing in the other big elections since Trump took office, such as the Alabama Senate race and the Virginia governor's race. And it's really kind of a split level result. On the one hand, we saw the Republicans continuing to consolidate their hold on small town and rural areas. Balderson won. There are 5 of the 7 counties in this district are blue collar, more rural counties. And Balderson won 62% in there. Not much different than what Donald Trump did in 2016 and significantly better than Mitt Romney did in 2012. The catch is that the other side of the equation is very real, too, which is that Trump regressed significantly compared to Romney in the suburban white-collar parts of the districts, and Balderson did even worse. He only won 43% of the combined vote in the 2 big suburban counties that cast the most ballots. So what that tells you, as Gloria said, is that if you're looking at the Republicans who are defending white-collar districts in places with a lot of college-educated white voters where Trump is underperforming really almost any previous Republican president, they have a lot to worry about. On the other hand, I think Democrats are still facing a significant headwind in a lot of these small town districts, some of which they have put some good candidates on the board and they have real opportunities in. And I think that on balance, you'd say this strengthens the case that Democrats are the favorites to win the House, but you could end up with a big divide after this election between a Democratic Party that is dominant in metro areas, a Republican Party that's dominant outside of them, and a real tough time finding common ground between the two.
We're only 90 days away from the midterm elections, guys. Stick around. There's more news we're following, including more on the Republican Party's latest political headache, as New York's Republican Congressman Chris Collins now faces charges of insider trading and lying to the FBI. And look at this. What message is North Korea trying to send by showing Kim Jong-un in a T-shirt and smiling? On our breaking news, Republican Congressman Chris Collins of New York pleading not guilty to fraud and other charges connected to alleged insider trading. Let's bring in our Justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider. Tell us more about this case, Jessica.
Wolf, it really is a stunning indictment for several different reasons. First off, prosecutors in this indictment lay out a litany of phone and email evidence to support their claim that Congressman Collins purposely passed on insider information when he was a member of the board of directors and then lied about it. And secondly, indictments of sitting congressmen really are rare, particularly in an election year. The Justice Department tries to avoid prosecutions that could sway voters. But here, the U.S. attorney was forceful in charging Collins, his son, and his son's soon-to-be father-in-law. Tonight, Congressman Chris Collins faces charges of insider trading and of lying to the FBI.
My constituents in Western New York.
The 68-year-old former businessman who served in Congress since 2013 surrendered to the FBI at his attorney's office in Manhattan Wednesday morning and then faced a judge. Collins is accused of giving insider information about pharmaceutical company Innate Immunotherapeutics to his son after Collins learned information before it went public.
He didn't keep it secret. Instead, as alleged, he decided to commit a crime. He placed his family and friends above the public good.
According to the indictment, while Collins was at this carnival-themed congressional picnic at the White House, posing for pictures with the president and first lady on June 22, 2017, he received an email at 6:55 p.m. that the drug trial the company had been banking on failed. At 7:10 p.m., he replied, Wow, makes no sense. 1 minute later, at 7:11, he launched a flurry of phone calls to his son Cameron. When they finally connected at 7:16, the congressman allegedly told Cameron the drug trial had failed. The next morning, Colin's son allegedly told his broker to sell, and over the next 3 days, ditched more than 1.3 million shares of Innate stock, saving himself a loss of nearly $600,000. And Colin's son allegedly passed on the information to several others, also prompting them to sell.
The illegal trading of that information.
The company didn't publicly announce the drug trial's failure until June 26th.
The defendants and their tippies accounted for over half of Innate's entire trading volume on the first trading day after they got the news.
Collins, his son, and his son's fiance's father were all questioned by the FBI in April and are now